The Nintendo 64 is, in my opinion at least, the greatest gaming console of all time. Just about every game on that bloody system was either A, a gem, B, a classic, or C, a legendary game. And I shall be reviewing every Star Wars game released for that system this year. And we started up this year with Shadows of the Empire, and we're going to continue on this review of N64 Star Wars games with Factor 5's masterpiece, Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron is a first or third person objective-based flying game and was developed by the legendary Factor 5 and published by LucasArts. It was released on the Nintendo 64 and the PC, and today we're going to be looking at the gameplay from both. What surprised me was the fact that the PC version was released first on December 3rd, 1998. The Nintendo 64 version was released a few days later on December 7th, 1998. This I find to be rather interesting because usually with these kind of games, the console version is released first and then the PC version is released. The earlier release date of the PC version leads me to believe that the PC version actually ended up receiving less development time, and that might explain a few things. The game features several camera modes. You can choose between third or first person mode on the fly, and each camera mode has its own merits. Third person is by far the easiest mode to play in since you can see much more of your surroundings, and first person is much more immersive as all the HUD elements from the third person mode are found on the fighter's control panel, and thus it actually feels like you are actually flying a starfighter, albeit in an arcade-styled form. In this game, you do not have to worry about energy management or more realistic flight characteristics. You do have to worry about your secondary weapons, though, as you only get a small number of torpedoes, missiles, or bombs. And if you run out, you ain't getting any more. The game also features a lives system. And since this is a Factor 5 game, it actually enhances the gameplay. Back in the 90s, I simply cheated to get unlimited lives, and I put in the code I give up every time I played this bloody game. As an adult, I actually ground a bunch of XP for my patience attribute and got it to 15, meaning that when I played this game for both this review and a live stream, I didn't use the unlimited lives cheat. And I have to say, the lives system actually makes the game that much more memorable. Allow me to elucidate. Factor 5 created the levels with the lives system in mind. Each level is actually quite short, and often they can be completed in less than 15 minutes. In some levels, the amount of lives you have does not even matter. You're usually guarding something, and if what you are guarding dies, you lose the level no matter how many lives you have. The lives system gives everything you do in a level weight. You know that if you mess up one too many times, you go back. And the levels are not so long that you dread going back either, and the game never becomes tedious or boring due to the limited lives. Instead, for the player, time slows down considerably. In every level, you are beset by numerous challenges, and each challenge can see you dead in short order, meaning that each level feels like it takes much longer than it really does. And if you need a good stomach exercise, look no further than Rogue Squadron. Many of the levels will have your stomach so tight in concentration that by the time you finish them, you'll have yourself a six-pack. Each level will have a different set of objectives to complete, and each level will be more or less distinct from the previous one. The game, thankfully, does not simply repeat, "Wipe out enemy fighters." The game does not even really have fighter sweeps, and most of the time you are playing CAS, aka Close Air Support, attacking ground targets and blowing up military installations. The most common enemy craft that you will be shooting down is the dreaded TIE Bomber. These dupe bastards can destroy just about anything in a couple of bombing runs. They may be slow, but they pack quite a wallop. The game's missions also have you guarding convoys, and by the Great Space Dragon, do I not envy pilots that have to do this in real life. The convoy really has no choice but to yo-jo it through enemy territory, and every Imperial in 5 bloody star systems wants them dead. So you will have to constantly be watching the radar for inbound enemy contacts. That radar is absolutely indispensable. If you want to so much as finish a level, you had better bloody well pay attention to it, as it will allow you to see those TIE bombers coming before you can even see them with the Mark I eyeball. The radar also is the only thing that will point you to an objective, and while these levels are shortened to the point, they are large enough to get lost in, and if you get lost, expect to have the enemy blow the crap out of an objective. Rogue Squadron is a skill-based game. You can't just fly around shooting whatever you want. You have to know what to do, and when to do it, and what order to do it in. Because if you don't, all you're ever going to see is... Speaking of which, would you believe there is actually a crossover level between Rogue Squadron and Doom? Welcome to Hellfest 1998! Fest is by far the hardest level in the game and is a good example of how this is a skill-based game. This level requires a 100% perfect run, and if you mess up just one time, you will either die or lose the level entirely. It took me over an hour and a half to complete. That's how hard this game can get. The level required you to protect 3 ATPTs. And they have armor made of rice paper, and they will die fast. Oh, I cannot wait for Rogue Squadron 2, because in that game there's a mission where you get to blow up a whole battalion's worth. That being said, you have to keep them alive. There are AT-ATs you have to tie up, there are tank droids that you have to blow up, and then there are TIE bombers you have to shoot down. There is no time to be cautious when tying up the thrice-damned AT-ATs. And until you master tying them up, you'll be crashing into just about everything, especially into the goddamn AT-AT legs. And the AT-PTs will die, and die a lot. If just one dies before you get past this wall here, you might as well just restart. And I like to restart by blowing them straight to hell where they belong. Once you beat the level, you will feel even greater euphoria than when you finally beat the Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3. For modern players, that is the easiest comparison to make. In the past, all games were hard. In the present, only From Software makes real, hard games. So think of Rogue Squadron like Dark Souls. Get good or die trying. Rogue Squadron features a great deal of unlockable content that is unlocked by actually playing the game. As stated, the difficulty in this game is considerable, and just finishing a level is a considerable achievement. The game takes it one step further, however, by grading you. You can potentially earn bronze, silver, or gold medals depending on how well you played. And believe me, getting a gold medal is no easy feat. The best I was ever able to get was bloody silver, which according to Jerry Seinfeld means of all the losers, I was first! Better than being the first of the tryhards. The more medals you earn, the more bonus content you can unlock. 3 of the 8 ships require unlocking via medals, and there are 3 hidden levels that require unlocking as well. This was a game from a time when the player didn't get achievements just by putting the game in. This was a game from a time where you couldn't just pay your way to victory. Of course, if you don't want to spend hours trying to get gold, you can just put in Dead Dak and Farm Boy and Good Guy Tie and get all the hidden ships and all the levels. Hell, the PC version is even more merciful and gives you access to the hidden Naboo N1 Starfighter for just beating the game. Yes, that N1 Starfighter. Back when this game was released, it was actually hidden. You couldn't even get access to it if you tried to cheat with a Game Shark. This was something that was pretty much unprecedented at the time and still is pretty bloody unique even to this day. The game was in development slightly before Episode 1 was released, and thus this was meant to sort of tie into it as soon as the movie was released. Until it was released, however, there was no way to see this hidden starship, and rumors abounded as to what it was. And when finally Episode 1, unfortunately, hit theaters, the secret code was released and everyone was able to finally play as the N1 Starfighter. While Episode 1 might have certainly lacked in quality, those N1 Starfighters certainly did not. When we finally got to see some actual Star Wars in Episode 1, those N1 starfighters looked like Space 57 Chevys, and when you finally got to see them shooting at droid starfighters, it was like, why didn't they show this earlier? Why did we have to sit through over an hour of Jar Jar to get to this?
This was a game where cheat codes could allow you to skip some of the more tedious parts of the game. But even with cheat codes, the game is still going to be tough. The cheat codes also allow you to unlock a few hidden features as well. One code turns the V-Wing airspeeder into a classic car, with sounds no less. Sadly, it appears that this code does not work with the PC version, and I am not entirely sure why. I suppose it was actually added later in the development cycle, and thus it was only able to show up on the later released N64 version. There is also a hidden level that you can access by typing in chicken. This level is found only in the N64 version, and in this level you play as an ATST. And this is actually a really fun level, as it allows you to stomp around like a great armored Godzilla, correcting everything in sight. You can even attack a rebel pilot barracks, and the level even has programming necessary for them to escape if you are feeling merciful. For a dev level that can only be found with a cheat code, this bloody thing is just as good as the other levels in the game. The PC version has the chicken cheat, but it is sadly not as good, as it only allows you to play as the ATST in the main game's missions, and that means that it's utterly unplayable. Rogue Squadron has 5 aerospace craft that you will use throughout the game. The X-Wing, the A-Wing, the Y-Wing, the Snowspeeder, and finally, the V-Wing. And of course, there are 3 hidden craft. The Naboo N1 Starfighter, the TIE Interceptor, and last but most awesome, the Millennium Falcon. Each aerospace craft is excellent, although the Snowspeeder seems a bit, shall we say, shoehorned in. It's the only craft that can take out AT-ATs. Surely a Y-Wing's bomb could take out one easy enough, and in Book 8 of Star Wars X-Wing, Rogue Squadron was able to take out AT-ATs with their X-Wing's laser cannons. When you first play the game, you will be limited to whatever the game wants you to play for a given level, but after you beat the game, you can try certain levels with different fighters. Most of the time, you will want to stick with the default ships, as those are the ships that really work best for a given level, and all the other fighters generally just increase the difficulty even further. Well, except for the N1 Starfighter. That thing is basically what you get when an A-Wing, X-Wing, and Y-Wing get together for one night and have too much Carillion ale and have a great many regrets in the morning, because it is by far the best fighter in the game. It takes a considerable amount of punishment and it dishes it out, and can fly as fast as a bloody A-Wing. It makes a hard game marginally less punishing. By far, my favorite fighter in the game is the X-Wing. It is the Mario of the game. It has good defense, it has good weapons, and it has good speed. All the other fighters are generally only specialist craft and should only be used in the levels in which they appear in. The A-Wing might fly fast, but it can take next to no punishment, and you will get shot down a lot with it. The Y-Wing can take a lot of punishment, but moves really slow, and you're only really armed with bombs, meaning you have one less offensive option. The Millennium Falcon works pretty well, as it actually has auto-targeting turrets, but it's one giant target. The TIE Interceptor is cool, but only for those who are Class 1 gold medal tryhards. In the main game, the V-Wing only shows up for the final level, and while it's cool enough, it happens to lack any armor, and you can get shot down even faster in it than in the bloody A-Wing. It of course does have super speed, and super rapid fire blasters, and cluster missiles, but for me, I found myself getting shot down all the time in it. In the N64 version. In the PC version, I actually was able to use it quite well, and it made for a great craft to use in the final level that it appears in. Rogue Squadron features a few hidden weapon upgrades here and there, and the more weapon upgrades you find, the easier the game will be. But finding those weapon upgrades is not an easy prospect, mainly because they're hidden within buildings that you have to blow up. And if you're focused on finding the bloody upgrades, well, you can easily lose the mission or get shot down. Graphically, the game is still impressive to this day. Sure, the graphics have aged, but not as much as other games from the late 90s, and that is due to the fact that we never really see any humans in the game. There are a few little pilot and stormtrooper sprites, and they look like what you would expect from the late 90s. But the Spacecraft buildings and level textures still hold up remarkably well. Machines generally age better than people, as evidenced by the Descent series from the early 90s. That was one of the first 3D games ever, and its machine design still look pretty bloody good even to this day. Getting humans to look right is something that games are still trying to do, as even modern games succumb to a trip down to the old Uncanny Valley State Park. Getting an X-Wing to look like a bloody X-Wing is significantly easier than getting Luke to look like Mark bloody Hamill. The Spacecraft are filled to the brim with excellent detailing and are animated quite well. The various levels still look damn good in terms of size and details. Ambush on Corellia has you saving Crix Maydeen yet again, and you have to go to Coronet, the capital city of Corellia, and Coronet looks and feels big. The various buildings are impressive in their detailing. Remember, 1998. The game features a few in-engine cutscenes, but never with people. It's just radio conversations between fighters, and due to this, these cutscenes hold up quite well. Indeed, better in fact than the stiff fest that was Jedi Knight 2. Those in-engine radio cutscenes wouldn't be as good as they are if the voice acting wasn't legendary. All the voice actors turn in amazing performances. And one must remember, 1998. Many games didn't even have voice acting. Hell, most games on the N64 just had text. And here we actually have real, bloody acting. All the performers take their role seriously and bring a great deal of life to what is, effectively, a radio drama. Just take a look at this scene.
Take them more? Ah, of course. Moff Theoden. How pathetic. Allying yourself with those rebel criminals' rogue squadron. You and your so-called rogues helped in the absconding of my ATPTs and the plundering of my research facility. My retaliation shall be swift and just. There is nothing just about your actions. Do you no longer harbor any loyalty to our Emperor? Defecting to the rebel terrorists shall be your undoing, Caton. Unfortunate to lose such a fine officer, but the weak will die off to make room for the strong. It is the way of the universe. Farewell, little rodent. There you are, you coward. Do you think you can get away in that shuttle? Caton, do not pursue that ship. Repeat, do not pursue Cyrdan. We don't know how many ships he has backing him up. We must remain here to secure Chandrilla. I copy. Coward.
Since we only hear these characters, a great deal of pressure is on the voice actors to turn in an emotive performance, because they do not have the crutch of fancy graphics to distract the player. Music for the game was quite legendary. Factor 5 even invented a whole new music compression system to get all the music and voice acting on that one little N64 cartridge. And the music and voice acting sounded quite good on the N64 and only sound a little bit better on the PC version. In addition to the standard Star Wars music, Factor 5 came up with the unique Rogue Squadron theme, a theme that stands wingtip to wingtip with the rest of the Star Wars music suite.
And unfortunately, I'm not going to take the risk of playing that particular theme because, well, the Googlog.
The PC version is far easier to acquire than the N64 version. All you need to do to play the PC version is download it off of GOG or Steam, whereas the N64 version requires a working, over 20 years old console, a working, over 20 years old controller, and last but not least, a working, but over 20 years old game cartridge. And that is not an easy prospect. The PC version works well on a modern system. However, the third-person camera features the dreaded camera bug. Apparently, this was present even in the original 90s release. This camera bug has no known fix and can certainly ruin your day. The only way to get the camera to work is to build a shrine to the machine god and pray to it nightly, and then it might work sometimes. In reality, the camera only works when it wants to, and the only strategy to get it working is to constantly change camera angles until it decides to work. The easiest workaround is to just play it in the first-person mode, but you can cajole the game into working in third-person, and I was fully able to complete the game in third-person mode. The game renders weirdly. The menus cannot be recorded by fraps, but the hangar and gameplay can, and the gameplay outputs in a higher resolution than the hangar. It's all just a bit strange. When you create a profile in a game, you can name it whatever you want, or you can have it auto-name, and the auto-name I got was Mara Jade. Oh, Factor 5, how I miss thee. Overall, despite the camera bug and a few other elements, the PC port is by far the easiest way to play Rogue Squadron and is the version that I recommend the most. Oh, you better believe I'm going to talk about those menus, because the menus in this game are every bit as iconic as the game itself. Even the title screen for the N64 version is extremely bloody memorable. The mission select menu is this little hologram that shows a little scene from the upcoming mission, and it generates a great deal of excitement for the coming battle. Then you have the legendary hangar. This hangar here is a callback to the Return of the Jedi hangar scene, and it looks absolutely excellent, and it's filled to the brim with little details. And you can also hear the tech specs of each of the various Aero spacecraft, including 2 out of the 3 hidden craft. Since the N1 Starfighter was supposed to be secret, you don't actually get any tech specs on it, but in an interesting little detail that only super nerds such as myself will notice, the pilot sprite is Little Orphan Annie. This hangar would go on to be every bit as iconic as the game, and in all the preceding games, it would just get more and more complex and more awe-inspirational.
As aforementioned, the story is absolutely excellent. But before we get into it, we of course must first take a look at the epic LucasArts logo.
So after that amazing intro, it's time to get into Star Wars Rogue Squadron. This game follows the adventures of the legendary fighter squadron named Rogue Squadron. It was formed out of the remnants of Red Squadron after the Battle of Yavin by then Commander Luke Skywalker. He wanted to create a fighter squadron crewed by pilots who were the best of the best of the best, sir. He was the commander and Wedge was his XO. In the game, we meet a number of different rogues and, well, sadly, spoiler alert, most die or are never seen or heard from again. The opening missions of the game are day-in-the-life missions of Rogue Squadron and don't have a plot structure. The plot itself kicks in the 5th level, Liberation of Gerard 5. The rogues are called in to save a planet from being looted by the local Imperial governor. The mission starts up normally enough, but then, after you have saved the planet's wealth from being expropriated, we cut to this.
This is Lieutenant Jason Moore of the Imperial 128th to Unidentified Y-Wing. Are you quite done? My vehicle has been disabled for a good 2 minutes now.
Jason Moore, consider yourself a prisoner of the Rebel Alliance.
Well, if you quit shooting at me, I have a proposal to make. One which would serve us all.
Thus we enter Jason Moore.
Big Papa Palps must have been smoking too much Sith hash, or not enough, because blowing up Alderaan was probably the dumbest idea he ever had. Jason Moore gets captured by the rebels and defects. Not out of self-preservation either. It is implied that she wanted to go over to the rebel side after Alderaan was blown up. Because, you see, she was born on Alderaan. Oops. And over time, she became more and more disillusioned with the Imperial cause. Jason Moore then kicks off the plot by informing the rebels of where the Imperials are the most vulnerable. Jason Moore actually has character. She is initially reluctant to attack her former comrades, but by the end of the game, she is a full-fledged Reb. Not only that, but Wedge gets character, and he actually gets a few quips here and there, and even reacts to Case and Moore joining the Squadron, and he even expresses suspicion of her. Remember, both then and now, arcade-based flight games generally lack character at all, and when someone new shows up, they generally just show up as a new name, and everyone acts like they've always been there. Not so here. Everything in this game has full context, and everything is justified. You know that secret TIE interceptor? Well, it was Case and Moore's. It's not just a ship you unlock. It actually has a story reason for existing. The villain for the game is Moff Cyrdan. There's a little bit of history between Case and Moore and the old Moff. His character is handled rather well. He is, of course, the bad guy, but he's not stupidly evil, nor does he feel like a Captain Planet villain. The plot for Rogue Squadron is very grounded. This feels very much like an X-Wing novel. It has a bit of realism to it that is often lost in many Star Wars games. And Factor 5 were able to use audiovisual shorthand quite well. This feels like a novel-quality plot compressed into the space of an N64 game cartridge. At the end of the game, you of course go face to face with Moff Cyrdan, and you blow the crap out of him. But, and this is a magnificently round and curvaceous bum, the game does not end with his death. Rather, it skips forward a number of years to the time of Dark Empire, and gets all the plot details right. In this level, you take to the sky in a V-Wing Aerospeeder. Luke has long since left Rogue Squadron to be some pie-in-the-sky mystic, leaving Wedge in charge. However, by the time of Dark Empire, Wedge has already become a commanding officer of an entire fighter wing, not just one squadron. But when some hungry world devastators show up looking for some delicious calamari, Wedge gets back into the saddle again and blasts some imp ass. In the comic, it was R2-D2 that blew up the Western Digitals, but here, Wedge pops the shield generators and takes them down single-handedly, and the game ends with Rogue Squadron flying off into the sunset to save more life and more civilizations to boldly protect the galaxy from harm. The end.
Rogue Squadron 1 would go on to be immensely successful and would become a million seller on the Nintendo 64, and would become my single favorite Rogue Squadron game because I feel that Factor 5 just got everything right with that particular game. The later sequels would simplify a few things and would ultimately make it just a little too easy. On the Nintendo 64, Factor 5 developed Episode 1, Battle for Naboo, that served as a sort of a sequel/prequel and had similar gameplay, but tweaked a few things here and there, and thankfully was still just as tough as Rogue Squadron 1. Rogue Squadron 2 would be released in 2001 for the Nintendo GameCube, and would be the third highest selling game on that system, and would allow you to play through a bunch of really cool missions, but I feel it was just a little too easy. We will definitely be taking a look at it during Star Wars Year. The final game in the Rogue Squadron series would be Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike. And it was actually, in my opinion, slightly better than Rogue Squadron 2. It was a little more difficult, and I actually liked the fact that you could play as Wedge Antilles and Luke Skywalker. Ultimately, the Rogue Squadron trilogy were some of the best games released on their respective systems. One sad thing to note is that Factor 5 actually went about remastering the Rogue Squadron trilogy and was going to release it for the Nintendo Wii, only to have it cancelled, fully completed. A travesty, if ever there was one. Ultimately, I highly recommend picking up Rogue Squadron 1 as it still holds up to this day, and it will likely suck you in 2019 just like it did in the late 90s for me. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Battlefront 2, the real version, and good LEGO Star Wars, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this awesome content.